Hello, it's Toaster Party, and today I'm going to talk about what my picks are for the 5 best Phyrexia all-v1 cards for CEDH. So this is the first new card set of the year, and there's some pretty interesting ones in here. So without further ado, let's go into some cards. Starting it off with a few honorable mentions, we have Canker Bloom Gauntlet and Synthesis Pod. With Canker Bloom Gauntlet, for 2 generic and a blue, you get an artifact that says Planeswalkers you control have 0 loyalty, proliferate, and minus 12 loyalty, take an extra turn after this one. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. So what's interesting about this card is that it is incredibly powerful with Planeswalkers. It gives them new abilities and also makes it easier to get to those really powerful ultimates. There's only one downside to this card, and that being there's not a lot of really powerful Planeswalkers in CEDH. From time to time we have seen decks pop up that use a much higher number of these cards, but typically they don't see a lot of play. This card could change that a bit in that it makes the deck a lot more viable, but we'll see, and that's why it's still an honorable mention. The other honorable mention here is Synthesis Pod. For 3 generic and a Phyrexian blue, you get an artifact that says pay a generic and a Phyrexian blue to tap it, exile a spell you control, and target opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a card with mana value equal to 1 plus the exiled spell's mana cost. Exile that card, then that player shuffles, you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So what's interesting about this card is that it basically allows you to target very specific spells in your opponent's deck. But the one downside to this is that you have to have a good knowledge of what is in your opponent's deck. The thing with CEDH though is that a lot of lists are pretty stock, and so you can be fairly confident in what you're going to be aiming for. Specifically, what I would think you would want to do with this is to trade a 4-mana commander, something like a Bruce Tarl, and then convert it into someone's Ad Nauseam. There is a downside to this, though, that being you're not guaranteed to run into an Ad Nauseam player, and the other downside being in a lot of Ad Nauseam decks, there is usually at least one other card in the deck that is 5 CMC, that being Force of Will. So, if you cannot guarantee that your opponent is running exactly Ad Nauseam as their only 5-drop, this could be a complete whiff. So, it's a very interesting and powerful interaction, but it's not always going to work. And that's why I keep it at an honorable mention. But let's move on to the list proper. Starting things off with number 5, Mind Splice Apparatus. For Mind Splice Apparatus, for 3 generic and a blue, you get an artifact with flash that says at the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. And instants and sorceries you cast cost 1 less for each oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. So we've seen this kind of Goblin Electromancer effect in the past. This is on a far more expensive card though, because it's a 4-drop. But the part that makes it a bit more interesting is the ability to have it have flash, and the fact that it gets better as the game goes on. There's a few Izzet lists that I could imagine want to have this kind of effect, stuff like Mizzix, where the commander's kind of already doing that, but having a bit of an extra boost could probably be beneficial for that kind of strategy. So just in case the commander dies, you can still attempt to go for your win using this card. So let's move on now to number 4, Canker Bloom. For a generic and a green, you get a Phyrexian fungus that has the ability to pay 1 generic to sack it to choose one of these effects. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or proliferate. It's also a 3/2. So basically this is just another Caustic Caterpillar effect. But this one comes with the additional upsides of being a bigger creature than Caustic Caterpillar, being a 3/2 versus a 1/1, and it also has proliferate as an option. Basically, every time one of these type of effects that get printed with the destroy target artifact or destroy target enchantment gets printed, it probably is going to see some play. And this one, again, has additional upsides versus some of the other ones that we've seen see play in the past. Let's move now to number 3, Skrelv Defector Might. For 1 white mana, you get a legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Might, with Toxic 1. It cannot block, but you can also pay 1 white Phyrexian to tap it, choose a color, and their target creature you control gets Toxic 1, and hexproof from that color until end of turn. It cannot be blocked by creatures with that color this turn. It is also a 1/1. So what's interesting about this card is it's basically just another Mother/Gither of Runes type effect. It's a bit worse than those because it also means you have to pay mana or pay life to use its effect, but it's another one of those effects, and it's not that much worse than the other two. So let's move on to the real heavy hitters of this set, with number 2, Tybar Jubilant Brawler. For one generic, a black and a green, you get a legendary Planeswalker Tyvar that says you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though they had haste. You can also use its +1 to untap one target creature, -2 it, mill 3 cards, then you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It also starts with 3 loyalty. So this is a low-costed Planeswalker with 3 very relevant abilities. The place that this card seems the most interesting is in the decks that are already playing Hermit Druid, or really want to use those tap abilities immediately. Stuff with things like Priest of Titania. Speaking of Hermit Druid, though, it can also reanimate dead Hermit Druids with that -2 ability, and then also immediately go for the combo right afterwards, because it gives it the ability to tap immediately. It also has applications in those random Planeswalker-heavy lists. So it's not often we see a very powerful Planeswalker in CEDH, but this one just might make the cut. So now let's move on to number 1, Mercurial Spelldancer. For one generic in blue, you get a Phyrexian Rogue that cannot be blocked, and it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Mercurial Spelldancer. And whenever Mercurial Spelldancer deals combat damage to a player, you may remove 2 oil counters from it, and if you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell, and then you may choose new targets for the copy. So this card is a very strong mid-range value piece that allows one to copy an instant or sorcery. So what this card is probably going to be really great alongside is things like tutors that either put cards to hand or to the field. It's also excellent along extra turn spells. Basically, it's not going to be very good in decks like Turbo because it relies on you to have already cast some non-creature spells, and also requires you to cast other things afterwards, but in those slower, grindier mid-range decks, this card is going to be awesome. Well, thank you all for watching. I hope you leave a like, comment, and you subscribe, and I hope you all have an excellent day.